Hello, good morning. My name is Anthony Bly, and I'm the host this week for the Regenerative Ag sessions. And thank you for attending today's session. Just a reminder, there's a Q&A and chat feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please feel free to enter a question or chat at any time. Yesterday we held them to the end, and I just think we're going to do that again. But as you think of the questions, just put them in if you have any. I think that works best with a Zoom presentation. Of course, the QR code for the CCA credits will be at the end as well. And I guess with that, I can get started. I'm the presenter today, so I'm going to attempt to share my screen again. Yeah, today I'm going to talk about what I've called agricultural composting. I think a lot of the time, composting is kind of interpreted as a term for those folks taking their food scraps or food waste and putting them in a little composting bin and turning them into compost. And it's gotten more popular with gardening people and homeowners and having a little compost pile in their backyard or something like that. But we can upscale that. And so that's why I've called this presentation today agricultural composting, because I'm going to kind of go into that route and talk about how it applies to general agriculture and broad scale field use. So I read a lot of definitions of what composting is, and I kind of robbed a few things from different sources and kind of came up with this definition, what I call agricultural composting. But basically, it's a natural force of cycling and recycling organic materials by providing more stable environments for bacteria, fungi, and other organisms to function, resulting in a stable material that can improve soil structure, increase water and nutrient holding capacity, and promotes beneficial microbial populations and enhances plant disease suppression. We know that there's many organisms that can help the plant fend off diseases. In fact, there are a number of laboratories that are providing DNA analysis of soil samples, looking at the levels of these suppressing microbiology levels in the soil. So that's a very real thing. There's a lot of benefits of composting. I've got the top 10 here. I'm sure if you're a regular composter, you've probably experienced other ones as well. But basically, we can kill pathogens in that compost. There are a few rare pathogens that can sneak through, but by and large, most of them are killed by that heating process. We can kill weed seeds that are in the materials that we put in the compost. Of course, now I'm talking about a situation that's done correctly, where someone has monitored temperature and moisture and just controlled that with either turning or inverting or whatever. So it has to be done correctly. Compost promotes beneficial bacteria, fungi, nematodes, protozoa, amoeba, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are some very beneficial nematodes, and those can be promoted through the compost process. Of course, humus is kind of what we're really all after. It's the most stable form of organic matter, and it provides a lot of benefits in the soil. We could just talk about the benefits of humus in particular, but compost, if done correctly, can create humus. It reduces the water content, especially if we're composting manures, therefore reducing the hauling costs of that material. You can haul it further. We can convert inorganic nutrients to organic forms, which basically stabilizes those forms. Organic forms are very stable compared to having too much nitrate in or ammonia in a compost source. Of course, we can use compost to propagate native microbes, and I'll touch on that a little bit later, but we have a lot of composters that are harvesting native microbes from their area and, in a sense, inoculating their compost with those microbes and trying to propagate that back. And we can talk about the reasons they do that as well, but I'm kind of giving an overview here. Converts rough carbon stocks to usable humus. We can take those carbon stocks, old straw, old hay, flooded straw, anything that's really unusable, and instead of burning it in a big pile, we should be composting it and putting those, what I call rough carbon stocks, into a more usable form. So those nutrients that are in those rough carbon stocks are composted. They are turned into more usable organic forms and don't need to go through that breakdown process if we would like apply those rough carbon stocks to the field. And compost does not smell. If done correctly, it should generally just have a very weak earthy odor at best, and that's what we want. And then compost is a more consistent product. Manures are very inconsistent, and the spreading of those manures is relatively inconsistent. I know we have vertical beaters and all of the good equipment, and that's been a great improvement over the old spreaders that we had decades ago, but compost is even more consistent. So the top 10 there, benefits of composting. So I just wanted to cover a bunch of the different methods in composting. There's a number of different reasons why you'd want to compost. Kind of identifying that from the get-go is going to maybe lead you into one of these methods. First and foremost, agriculture has been really using dead animal composting for a long time. It's a very effective way to break that carcass down and turn it into a really usable, soil amendment. Then there's the aerated static pile, just a pile that's put out there and kept at the temperature 130 to 40 degrees there. Anaerobic dead animal composting is slightly higher temperature. We can dig a hole and we can put our materials in the soil and compost it in the soil and use the soil as the vessel. And then above ground vessels are a barrel for those smaller composters, or there's even companies making these large cylinder containers, and they turn very slowly. The material's put in one end, and then the compost comes out the other end. So that would be an example of a vessel composter. Vermicomposting is where we purposely use worms to accelerate the composting process. There's a lot of soil microbiology associated with those worms as they do that. And the worm casts and what I call the worm juice that is harvested from vermicomposting is very good stuff. I just read yesterday, and I should have probably threw that article in here, but some scientist in Siberia was able to find or harvest a worm that they could, I don't know how they maybe carbon dated it to be 46,000 years old, but it came to life. And so there's something about earthworms and their casts that they leave behind are very rich in really igniting soil microbiology in the soil. There are businesses that just produce worm casts and sell worm casts. I'm familiar with a producer in South Dakota that bought at least a semi load or more of worm casts and extracted those worm casts and applied that to his crops. So it's really an interesting thing, and I think it's relatively easy to do at scale. We can make a trench in the soil and kind of like a bunker, if you would, in the soil. We used to back in the olden days dig a trench in the soil and put the silage in there and just cover the top. That's kind of a practice that's gone away, but that is also a possibility. Of course, windrows are probably the most popular large-scale composting method, where we pile the materials in a windrow, and then I'll show you a picture of a turner later, but that can turn that windrow very quickly and easily. Of course, Dr. Johnson and Dr. Sue developed what they call a low-tech bioreactor. We refer to that as a Johnson-Sue composting method. It's just a static vessel container. I see a lot of people using these chemical totes. There's a lot of those for sale today that have cleaning agents in them, and they're very easy to rinse out. And they cut the top off and they build their compost in that tote, and they put some aeration tubes in and they just let that set. It's very low tech. It's basically low labor except for filling and taking it out. Community composting is another term that I came across. And it's nothing more than using local sources. And I think mostly from the agricultural standpoint, that's what we're doing. We're using manures, we're using rough carbon stocks from the area, and that would be community composting. And adding native microbiology to that would also fit that description. And then I ran across a term called bokashi. And a lot of people say bokashi composting, and composting is one of the second parts of bokashi, but really in its first stages, it's really fermenting. I'm not going to go into that in any depth right now, but I wanted you to become aware of that term because I'm going to highlight the fact that composting and this type of agriculture is worldwide. And I'm not going to be conclusive in saying every society around the planet you can see examples, but I would bet very strongly that you can. And I think you know what I'm talking about. So I want to next talk about conditioned versus compost manure. We have some feedlots that are piling their manure in windrows, and they are using a compost turner to condition that manure. I'm discussing this because it's wrongly identified. It is not compost. Okay, it's conditioned manure, and I want folks to understand the difference. Conditioned manure is just sized a little bit better, made more consistent, and it's a better product than just straight manure, but it's still conditioned. The temperatures are not monitored in conditioned manure. The microbial value is not maximized. It still smells. Pathogens could survive. Weed seeds could survive. There still are some larger chunks. It kind of depends on how well they condition it. And then the nutrients are not fully stabilized. And I have a picture of a pile of conditioned manure there on the left. Looks like great stuff. And, you know, it is. I'm not trying to denigrate it at all. I'm just trying to point out the differences. But on the left side of that pile, you can see something very key to prove my point that it's just conditioned manure. Is there's some steam coming off of that pile. And that is telling us that it wants to go into that microbial state and still go down that composting path. And so true compost is done heating. It's done It's a stable organic product. The temperatures are maintained between 130 and 40 degrees. I failed to put the moisture level is also maintained at a nice moist level, not too wet, not too dry. The microbial benefits of compost are maximized because it's gone through that heating process. The heat in compost is coming from the microbial activity that's themselves. The respiration and their activity is creating that. True compost does not smell. The pathogens and weeds should be dead. It has superior consistency, and the nutrients are mostly all in the organic form, so they're stabilized. And I've got a picture there of a producer I know that uses that windrow concept for conditioning manure. Okay, just some little bit of data here, comparing conditioned manure to manure compost, and we can see that the salts are reduced in the manure compost because we've added other materials to dilute that out. The organic N is a little bit higher in the conditioned manure, and we've kind of consumed some of that in the manure compost while we've the biology has used that to work on those other rough carbon stocks that are lower in nitrogen. We see our inorganic nitrogen higher in conditioned manure, and remember I said that that's a more unstable form of N, and we see it a lot lower in the manure compost. We see relatively similar levels of P and K, less P in the manure compost because of the dilution effect, but we see K higher because we've added plant materials, and we know that the plant materials is where the K is at, in the plant. It's not in the grain. We see moisture a lot less in the compost, carbon percent less in the compost, and the C to N ratio is slightly depressed as well. So there's definitely some benefits to composting, and I think the biggest benefit is converting rough carbon stocks into something that's usable and using that compost as a carrier for microbiology, beneficial microbiology. So when we compost, we think about it in this way. 60% of the materials going into there should be brown material. Think of it that way. Low N, high carbon. 30% should be green material, higher in N content. And then about 10% very high N content material. We can get that from adding different things into our mix. There's no right or wrong recipe, but if we follow kind of this concept, we can be more successful. And then some secondary ingredients that we can add to improve the biology in the compost would be soybean meal, dry molasses, bone meal, rock phosphate, native soil, if you can find some in your area. Wood chips are a good carbon source. Old compost to kind of ignite the new process, and then old manure as well. And I have a note at the bottom, manure probably contains enough N and just needs additional carbon most of the time. And then I've mentioned this many times here, but think about composting old hay, straw, and I even know a producer that bales cattails. He knows when he can go out and harvest those cattails, and I've got a good example later of why that's kind of neat. So here are some of those materials and what they're known for: nitrogen, carbon, and then I have phosphorus and calcium. And the reason to put the phosphorus and calcium sources in the compost at very small rates is to just encourage phosphorus mineralizing and solubilizing of microorganisms. Same way with calcium, and you could go on down the line with that too, and try to encourage the proliferation of those microbes in your compost. Example of flooded bales. This was last year. We were talking about all the rain before the meeting here in May and June, and we had a lot of hay that was put up, and the floodwaters came up really fast, and And really, these bales probably shouldn't be used as livestock feed because of the floodwaters containing, you don't know. And probably should be just composting these bales. I think a great source for composting. Here's an example of a producer that has a small windrow. You can see on the left the materials there in the windrow, and then the result is what's on the right. And this producer in particular is doing that mainly to propagate biology that he can apply to his fields. You can see on the right there, the soaker hose on top of the pile. That's how he adjusts his water. So there's no right or wrong way to do this. I think it's you need some experience, and there's a lot of folks that have done it and can get you along. So I'm going to go into kind of another probably section of my talk today. I talked about the composting and now some ideas on using that. And we see a lot of products today that are, they have 1 or 2 microbes in them in the jug. Call them bugs. Probably shouldn't say bugs anymore, but why not make your own? You can do it very easily and have a lot more diversity. And so we've got I'll go back to that producer, and these are the ingredients that he uses in his compost. A variety of a lot of different things just to foster and proliferate that environment for a whole variety of microorganisms that can do many different functions. And so I mentioned the 60% brown material, 30 green, 10 high green there, and some of the examples of what he uses in his compost. He makes very, very good quality compost. And he doesn't have a turner. He's just got a nice loader there with a grapple, and he does the 1/3 method where he'll take off the top third and put that on the bottom, and set the middle third aside and put the bottom in the middle and the middle on the top. And that's how he turns his compost. There's no extravagant way to do it. So it can be easily done. And then he takes that compost and he puts it through a process called extraction. And he is extracting the microbiology from that compost by putting it in that black cone bottom tank you see there kind of in the middle, and bubbles that for for a certain amount of time, and combines that with some foods he's developed. And I'm not going to talk about the foods part because I'm just kind of talking about the compost part, but this is another highly detailed process that this producer is going through. And you probably say, well, this is just for organic producers. And I'm going to tell you flat out, he's not an organic producer, nor wants to be. He realizes he has to control weeds somehow, and he sprays herbicides for control of weeds in a limited way, but he still does. And he also wants to have that option of augmenting his crops with some commercial fertilizer if it's needed. And he's monitoring his crops, and he has applied some extra nitrogen where it's needed in some cases, but very, very limited and very small amounts. And so we've sampled some compost to look at the microbiology diversity in it. And what you get back is you get back a report with a list of all these species and the colony forming units. I know this is really small. I'm not intending for you to read it at all, but I wanted to show you that the last number here over on the right-hand side is 454. So in this compost, the lab that did the DNA extraction found 454 identifiable species based upon DNA. Of Of course, their report is more extravagant. They group them into nitrogen type microbes, phosphorus, those pathogenic fighters, if you will, and well. So the report is a lot more detailed. But I just wanted to show you that you may want to be enticed to buy a jug that has 1 or 2 or 3 bug or microbes in it. But I think this is evidence that we can produce a lot on our own. So, how can you do this? What can you do? How do you get started? I guess those are the big questions. I think I would not recommend that you go it on all by yourself. The community surrounding this type of approach is very supportive and robust. There are a number of people doing that. I have organized a very loose-knit biological agronomy learning community. I don't think I'd go to that as the first source, even though I've organized it. There's a lot more going on around us. I guess when there's events that I know about, I email that group and let you decide if you want to go. I just returned from the Regen Nexus in Omaha. That's a group of like-minded people, and there's where you go to get educated. There's a lot of materials, a lot of videos, and lots of things going on. And I've highlighted Doctors Ingham and Jones and White here. Dr. Ingham, a microbiologist, has started her own company, Soil Food Web. She does a lot of training. Of course, it's a cost. But there's a lot of her students working in this field that are providing expertise on this level as well. Christine Jones from Australia. Dr. Jones is from Australia. And Dr. White is at Rutgers. And his research team is working on these concepts. That's their objectives. And Dr. White really, I believe, coined the phrase rhizophagy cycle. And that's a proliferation of microbes interacting with plant roots. And it can be identified by looking at the plant roots that are covered with very fine soil particles and are held to the plant roots. You don't have this white, shiny plant root. You have plant roots that you can't see the white, shiny surface because they're so covered with microbiology activity. And so that's rhizophagy cycle. A friend of mine recommended these books, The Complete Book of Composting, Humus and the Farmer there in the middle left, and the Encyclopedia of Organic Farming. Now, we're not trying to convince you to all turn organic or anything like that, but there's a lot of concepts and information coming from that source. And then you're going to see the Stockman's Handbook. And the reason that was recommended by my friend is that there's a lot of information on different materials that you can use to put into compost. And so it's more of a reference guide for like the number of the protein, the nitrogen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then Soils and Men, an old book on the right side there, has some more information as well. So I want to talk about Hamilton Farms as a real example of composting. They have beef feedlot manure, and they've combined that with cattail bales, rye straw, or even some bad rye grain that they had because of certain reasons. Things that can't be used as feed or anything else can be put through the compost pile. And so they combined these materials, and they created what we calculated to be about $22,000 of additional usable nutrients by turning those rough carbon stocks into more usable material. And they use the manure as the nitrogen source to do that. And so we can see that the compost analysis there has gone down compared to the manure, but they have more of it. Okay. So they created additional usable nutrients, and they reduced the salt load of the manure by 25%. So here's that compost turner and the windrow there. And I've kind of gleaned some of my slides out of other presentations. So you already know that it's more of a consistent material, a product, if you will. You can see there that there's some water jets inside that compost turner machine, and the tank is behind. You can't see it. It's on the other side. They're pulling it alongside of the windrow there, and they're adding water as they turn. And they have become very good in a short period of time because they hired someone to teach them how to do it. And they temp check with temp probes. They do the feel method for the moisture, and that's how they do the composting. And basically, they knew nothing about it, and they got to this level in a very, very short period of time. So I don't know if you noticed, but the byline for the regenerative week was regenerative is circular, because that's, I think, what we feel is very important, learning about regenerative ag. And I'll show you in the next slide why I believe that. It's a circular system. So let's just think of this black squiggly line across there as the soil horizon, or a landscape, if you will. So we have higher landscape positions and we have lower landscape positions. And currently in those lower landscape positions, we've got wet, salty soils, usually giving no yields, and we have nutrients accumulating there. Like it or not, those salts that are accumulated there are mostly plant essential nutrients. And there's whole reasons why that is happening, and we're not going to talk about salty soils today. But in this landscape, we have that happening. And in some of those areas, we have cattails growing. Some of those areas, we have a lot of kochia growing. We have weeds growing. You can compost kochia, okay? And then on our upland soils is where our highest yields are coming from right now. We're removing nutrients from those landscapes at a much higher rate. And in this example, we have corn, silage, and alfalfa being removed. And it's going to the feedlot. And so that feedlot manure becomes a good nutrient source. We know manure has really good soil amendment properties, but we're going to combine that manure with these waste materials, these rough carbon stocks, and produce a high quality compost. And the goal and objective was to replace the P and K fertilizer needs across the farm and use it, actually precision apply it. There's manure spreaders that can do that now, and put that back on the landscape in an appropriate fashion. And so we're, in a sense, harvesting those rough carbon stocks and putting it in and putting it back on the good parts of the landscape that produce the highest yields, that have the highest nutrient removal. So it is circular. And I think as we go into the future, we need to think more and more about this circular way of doing things. And currently right now, I know a lot of folks are corn, beans, whatever, and I'm not advocating you change next week, next year, or in the next years, but I'm advocating that we think about these issues and we start to talk about them and work through them. So the commodity market is for export is linear. Okay. We get our inputs, we apply them, and we use fuel and equipment and time to apply them. The inputs, fertilizer, seed, water, sunlight, energy, all those things. And let's just think about phosphorus fertilizer just in this concept. It's coming from most of it from Morocco to the northern hemisphere these days. And so it's mined in Morocco, put on a ship. There's a belt in Morocco that's 60 miles long that transports it from the mines to the coast. And then we apply it and we produce our crops and then we export them. And nothing comes back. It's a linear system. Again, I'm not being overly critical of this system. I'm just bringing awareness to what we're currently doing. Okay. So the true cost of this system is the natural resources that we use and lose and never return. That's the true cost. And notice that there in production, I don't have corn, beans, or wheat. I have nutrients, carbon, water, protein, and oil. And we're exporting those. We're exporting water through the growth of our commodities. Okay, so it's linear. Okay, now if we go back to the regenerative is circular, keeping the nutrients on the farm, we can think of this in many different ways. I have cropland systems on the left circle and perennial grass systems on the right. And we see how these systems are interacting with livestock and soil biology and nutrients that the soil biology releases because our biology is healthy if we manage it correctly. And then in the middle, I have two yellow arrows implying that we can jump out of one and jump in another. And we can do that. And I'm kind of implying that cropland, we can do this on cropland. Vander is going to speak tomorrow. He's from Brazil, and I believe in Brazil, from what I know, they used to have a certain period of grass pasture, and then they crop and then go back to grass pasture and crop. And I don't know if that system is widely used anymore, but we can jump back and forth, okay? And over on the left-hand side, you see we take our crops off for money because we need money, and we have biology coming into the system from the soil, and we take off livestock for money there as well. But we keep the nutrient cycle going, and basically carbon is the foundation of this. Now, I am not talking about climate change. I'm not talking about greenhouse gases. I'm not talking about any of that. This story existed way before that, and carbon is key. So in this system, I've got these three terms. Regenerative is carbon into this system is greater than carbon out. We're regenerating the system. Sustainable is carbon in is equal to carbon out. We're just keeping it as it is. And degenerative is carbon in is less than carbon out. We're losing something. We're losing our natural resources. Okay. So another way to think about changing management is holistic farming. Thinking about all of the factors in all of these decisions that you make. And I've put what I think are a lot of those factors around this circle because we're thinking of it as a whole. And everything is interrelated. Crop residue, climate, soil moisture, rotation, soil nutrients, wildlife profitability, livestock, cover crops, the people on and off the farm, and of course, pests and weeds. It's all related, and all the decisions you make affect each other. And so I'm saying is that if you can start to think about your decisions, considering all of these, we'll get to a better place. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about the regenerative soil testing labs that are out there. I'm not going to name any in particular. You can find them, but they do a lot of different testing compared to our standard soil testing labs. They do all of the soil health parameters. They may do DNA profiles. They may group them into functional groups. We may be measuring microbial associated nitrogen or microbial associated carbon. We actually measure the CO2 that comes off from a microbial activity, and we can do a bunch of these measurements down below. Okay, I'm going to go into the third section of my talk, and I'm going to go really fast because this seems to be kind of a fading thought with our change here in the country, and I don't know what's going to happen, and I'm not implying anything, but I used to mention that a lot of these, well, all these companies want to buy carbon from farmers, okay, because they want to offset another company's carbon, and maybe this could be going away, maybe it'll come back. I don't know. I just left it in here. But we know carbon and organic matter are very well correlated. About 55 to 60% of organic matter is carbon. The soil nitrogen cycle here, we have huge amounts of fossil fuels used to produce fertilizer. We lose methane from the cows, and over here in the right-hand corner, nitrous oxides from those commercial fertilizers. Why not compost here instead of fertilizer? I think it's a valid point. We know that about every step in this nitrogen cycle, carbon is a player. Carbon is a player. And so the interrelationships of carbon and nitrogen are very strong, and we should not ignore the role that carbon has. Totally irrelevant or unrelated to the climate and greenhouse gas discussion, really. And don't even want to talk about that. We know that more organic matter produces more bushels of corn. At this site, for every 2% organic matter, we got 58 bushels more corn. Okay, we know that. We know from a series of nitrogen rate trials that Jason and I had, we kind of combined our data here. We know that the ones where the optimal nitrogen rate of 0, we know that they're on leading soil health producers' farms. We know that, okay? We're all after more for less. And this is a nitrogen rate response curve where we have the different nitrogen rates there, and we've identified about 55 pounds of N as the optimum rate. We know that produced 35 bushels of corn. We know that's a good return. We know this is on a site that's had soil health practices on it, and we know the organic matter percent's very high, 5.4%. So that cycle, that nitrogen cycle, is very robust, and it doesn't need a lot of help from nitrogen additions as fertilizer or even compost. Needs some, but not a lot of help. But we can't get to this point unless we focus on carbon. We know the differences in tillage. Left, more of a conventional system, lighter brown, lower organic matter; right, darker, aggregated soil health system. So we did a little bit of data collecting over the years, and we were able to look at conventional and no-till farms. Here's some of the data that I'm going to use. Big take-home message here is the equipment investment on the conventional versus the no-till farm. I'm kind of remiss in calling these no-till farms. They're really soil health farms, okay? And the diesel is another contributing factor, only about half, let's just say. Corn yield similar, size of farm similar, and other things. Put those in the GREET model, and you all been hearing CI scores. Wanted to share that again. Don't know if it's going away or if it's staying. Right now, don't care. I just want to show you that we're putting more carbon in the soil with our soil health farms. The green there below the 0 line, the negative 4231, is carbon going back into the soil on our soil health side. The average CI score for corn in the United States is 29. Those 4 conventional farms in South Dakota were 34, and our 4 soil health farms were 11.3. Okay. So the GREET model is easy to come by. See my little circle there is off the wrong spot, but it's the FDCIC tool if you're interested. It's that selection right there. There's a number of hoops you got to jump through, but I'm sure you're all good at finding that. This is what the data input page roughly looks like. And that chart there that you see that's kind of small, that's the chart I had blown up a couple slides before. So there's a lot more data in here. What I failed to get done in preparation for this PowerPoint was to, there's a part here where they have manure, and you can use manure and replace a fertilizer. And what happens is this green area gets even bigger. Okay. And compost would do it as well. Okay. So it's a good thing. So with that, I'm done right at 45 minutes. Don't know if you have any questions or not. I see maybe one there. Okay. If using paper or cardboard as a rough carbon spot, should it be shredded? Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned a lot of other rough carbon stocks. The cattail bales, 5-6 foot long cattails rolled up. They had to size those before they put them in, in the windrow. They made them in smaller chunks. Same with wood chips. If you want smaller chips for the pile, they'll break down quicker. And I failed to also mention there's way more details in all this. An hour or 45 minutes does not do it justice at all. But the wood chips are there as a feed or an encourager for fungi formation in those compost windrows. Our soils are lacking in fungi, and anything we can do to encourage fungi is important. Okay, one on the chat. How long does it take? A month. Let's just say a month. If you're managing that compost pile or windrow well, and you're turning it when it needs to be turned, these things are maturing in a month. Yep, great question. Thank you. Anybody else got a question? Maybe kind of a far out presentation. I don't know, but lots and lots of people are doing it, and I think it's something that we need to definitely investigate and consider with a lot of our materials that we have. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to put that QR code up. What is it here? 2 minutes early. I don't think anybody will care. Oh, there it is. So there's your CCA credits for the day. And I'm supposed to do something else. I don't know if I can get that done. Well, thanks for attending today. I'm supposed to paste something in the chat there, but thanks for your attendance today. Look for these will be recorded. They'll be on the Extension Crop Hour webpage if you want to take a look at them again. And then tomorrow, Dr. Vander Nunes will be speaking about the impacts of commercial fertilizer and soil microbiology. And so we're looking forward to that. He's the last one in our Crop Hour series, a whole 8 weeks we've ran. Okay, there's another question. What do you suggest for the producers exclusively to grow crops who do not have readily available manure? The cost of hauling manure is pretty high. Yes, exactly. So the one picture that had the small compost pile, he was using a lot of manure. In fact, manure was a very small part of his recipe for his compost. He was using hay, straw, green hay, alfalfa, a little bit old manure, some native soil. What else did he have? Rock phosphate. He had blood meal, bone meal, and small amounts. It don't take a lot. And he was making his compost for extracting purposes. So that's how he was getting biology to his fields without having to deal with tons and tons of compost. Great question. Thank you. Did I miss any? I don't think so. Okay. Well, I guess.
So I was wondering, how much do they usually apply per acre when you have your compost? And on top of that, would you recommend like using both, like a compost plus commercial fertilizers, or just rely on the compost? What do you think is the best strategy, or it just depends? I don't know.
Well, we're actually shooting in the dark, Vander.
Mm-hmm.
This is the areas that we need to do research. And and the farmers that I talk to, this is the questions that they have. You've hit it right on target. And so we're helping this one producer in particular decide that. He has a very good agronomist that is bought in, that gets it as well. A conventional agronomist, have you, who's followed the conventional way of doing things and has come to witness a lot of these benefits. And so it's going to be variable rated. Um, he he is pelletizing his compost too.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So he's gonna do a multi approach. He'll be blowing some pellets into in a strip till machine. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
he'll be blowing some pellets in an air drill, and
Mm-hmm.
he'll be broadcasting compost too, because he can't pelletize at all. Okay, so the pelletized rate is much lower, right? 200 to 500 pounds an acre. and
Okay.
and and the compost application broadcast is probably going to be 1,000 to 4,000 pounds per acre, depending upon zone. He's not going away from precision ag at all. He's still using precision ag, but he said it to me himself. He said, what I need is a carbon map. I need to apply my compost based on carbon.
Interesting.
He's the first producer to have said that. And, Clarence worked with Dwayne. You haven't worked with Dwayne as much, Vander, but Dwayne said this, I'm going to guess, but at least 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
25 years ago, Dwayne said we should be focusing more on carbon and applying carbon than we should anything else. And so, I've learned a lot from Dwayne, right? And
Yes.
so that's the direction I see us going with a lot of different things. And quite frankly, is there anybody else left? Oh yeah, there's a few people left on the call. So I think traditional agronomy has its place, but there's a lot of sources of information for traditional agronomy, and there isn't a lot of places for information on this topic. And
Yep.
so I think it's a need. It's a information gap, if you will. And it's happening all over. There are people uh, extracting, making teas. The Commodity Classic wheat winner, or one of the categories they have, used biological approaches, extracting, compost, teas, all
Yeah.
those things. And so it's a coming thing. It'll be important for you guys because you're young. And And that's why I'm so excited about Clarence's work. Yes, he presented. I've seen it before. I need to see it again. And what you're going to do, Vander, and what you've done in Illinois. Yeah, I mean, I think it's your future. I mean, it's
Yep.
we will have traditional agronomy. There's no doubt about it. Um, but the more we can focus on keeping our systems circular, I think those systems are going to win in the long run.
Completely agree with you. You were mentioning this rotation and integrating livestock. I was working in Illinois. We just finished the project. They have a 6-year rotation. 3 years they have a pasture mix. In 2 of the years they do allow livestock to go and graze, and the other years they have cash crops, corn,
Oh,
soybeans, and every year a different cover crop.
yeah.
And it's amazing. I gotta ask them if they do composting or not, but they're doing well. When I was there, I myself measured corn yield. They got almost 160 bushels of corn, which is not the upper limit to that region in Illinois. Some farmers there
No,
get way more than that, but I mean, they're not applying.
they're
They're
not
just
applying a lot of
relying
inputs.
on,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And today we're talking about there's no commodity crop that's got a profit. Farmers are
yep,
doing their profit analysis right now, and there's nothing that they believe they could grow and make a profit with conventional approaches. And um, I'll be the last person to say anything is wrong because it's right for the person that's using it, right? And so we have to help them with wherever they're at. But I'm trying to go down this regenerative road as a way to show people that if they can work themselves into this and out of the conventional way, that during times like this very uncertain time that we have, they're probably going to coast through just fine if they're relying more on regenerative practices and circular type approaches. So yeah, that's the only reason. It's not a quick fix by no means. You can't buy it off the shelf and go put it on and it's fixed. It's not a quick fix. So yeah, so I'm excited for you guys.
Thank you for your presentation again. It was great.
Yeah, you bet. I'm
I'll
excited
go,
for
I'll
our
go
farm
finish mine, and I guess I'll see you tomorrow
tomorrow.
morning.
Yep,
Yep.
sounds
Have
good.
a good one.
Perfect. Great
Hey,
job, guys.
yep,
Have a
thanks.
good one.
We'll see you tomorrow.
Yep.